tonight we're just going to go through the basics. You have in your right-hand side on the question panel, you can pop a question in there if you want to ask me something, and we'll try and make this as interactive as possible so that we can take questions along the way if we want to. Okay, so this is me, Carolyn Ladowski, and I founded MTHFR Support Australia about 5 years ago. And the reason I did that is because I really wanted to know what people's bloods were doing, and I kept doing the blood tests all the time for B12 and folate, and I was quite intrigued that half the population would actually have an asterisk over their red blood cell folate levels. And I rang the labs and I said, look, what's going on with this? Why would someone have high levels? And they said, oh, they must be eating a lot of leafy green veggies. And I thought, well, no, I don't think that's the issue, because I knew that these patients that I was looking at in front of me were actually not particularly well, and they certainly weren't eating a lot of leafy green veggies. So that's that I kept looking, and I searched and I did Google and everything I could possibly think of, and absolutely nothing came up. And I was at a conference in Melbourne maybe about 7, 8 years ago, and there was a doctor there presenting who made an off-the-cuff comment that it was related to the MTHFR gene. And I made a beeline for her at the end of the presentation and said, what is this gene and how can I find out about it? And that's been the journey ever since. And ever since I found it, I really did have such a different practice, because I was actually seeing results that I had never, ever seen before. So it was really quite exciting. And so that's the story basically of why I did it. So we're going to talk about, for those of you that don't know what the MTHFR and methylation and everything is about. So basically, the MTHFR gene, when you eat leafy green vegetables, your body should convert that into an active folate, and we call that active folate 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. And think of it like a master on-off switch. It regulates the activities of everything from your amino acids, your proteins, your enzymes, even cancer-promoting genes are turned off by the active folate. So it's really important that we've got good levels of it. And here on the right-hand side, you can see a methyl, and it's just a carbon surrounded by 3 hydrogen. And it has this arm, so it can actually attach to other groups and become like this master switch. So when we have enough of these methyls, this now allows our body, from a biochemical point of view, to do what it needs to do. So, as I said, turning genes on and off, building and repairing our DNA and RNA. And that's why it's so critically important in pregnancy, because those women that have had multiple miscarriage, often it's because their DNA is compromised due to a lack of folate. Reducing the aging process. So by having these methyls, it actually protects the telomeres and enables those telomeres, which sit on the end of our chromosomes, to remain tightly bound. And that's what we need. We need them lengthened and we need them tightly bound. And as we age, they actually do become compromised. And so the more loose these telomeres get, the faster we age. It detoxifies chemicals and heavy metals. So a really important process of this is detoxification. And that's why we see so many people with MTHFR genes with multiple chemical sensitivity and just a general lack of detoxification capacity. So glutathione, our major antioxidant, is really created along this pathway, and I'm going to show you that in a minute. It processes our hormones, particularly our toxic estrogens. So our COMT gene, COMT, is a methyl transferase. So any enzyme ending in MT is a methyl transferase, and it can only work if you have enough methyls in the system. So for you to break down toxic estrogens, you must have enough methyls. It builds our immune cells. It turns the stress response on and off. And that's really crucial because when we are really stressed, we use methyls more than anything else. So we actually burn through them. And that's often why people say, well, I've obviously had this gene my whole life, but how come all of a sudden it's an issue? And invariably, it's stress of some sort. Now, it can be mental stress, but it can also be physical stress. So particularly elite athletes, you would have seen in the news a lot over the last 10 years, how some of these elite athletes get serious anxiety and depression. Look at poor Grant Hackett at the moment. He's really suffering post his career. And it's probably because he's used a lot of these methyls, and perhaps he has MTHFR, I have no idea, but it's an interesting thing to think about, that even from a physical aspect, we can use up these methyls. And of course, although we have genes, it's really our environment that causes the genes to cause us a problem. So what we eat, the stress we are under, the sleep we're getting, the alcohol we're drinking, the environmental toxins we're exposed to, all of those things make a huge difference in how the gene then transgresses in our body. It provides us with energy because this phosphatidylcholine pathway is absolutely crucial for energy, but also you'll see that this pathway feeds directly into our energy cycle. So if we have parts of this methylation cycle that are falling down, then we've got problems with our energy. It reduces histamine. So you've heard me talk a lot about histamine. But all those kids with allergies and asthma and everything else, we've got to be thinking histamine, because histamine, as I said today in the Facebook group, anywhere you have smooth muscle, histamine causes a contraction. Now, if that's in the respiratory system, you can understand why someone would get asthma, because you're actually causing a contraction of the lung tissue. So hives, classic example of an elevated histamine. Some people might get terrible PMS because it's causing a contraction of the uterus. And histamine and estrogen have a very close relationship, in that when estrogen is too high, or when estrogen is high, when it could be just at the appropriate times of the month, like at ovulation or premenstrually, you can get histamine reacting on the uterus, which causes a contraction and painful periods. It repairs cell membranes and produces myelination of nerves. Crucially important because we need good fats and these phospholipids to make our brain work. We also need it for the myelination of nerves so that the messages that go from our body to our brain actually happen. And we need to support neurotransmitters. So this is really important. Our brain chemicals need methyls to ensure that we don't have depression, we don't have anxiety, we can sleep, and our brain literally can work. So some of the things that might affect methylation. So certainly environmental toxins are a big one. Endocrine disrupting hormones, pollution, bisphenol A lot of these things, and particularly, we have a whole environment of plastics, don't we? We're buying foods from supermarkets covered in plastic. We're drinking out of plastic drink bottles. We're heating things up in the microwave in plastics. Our whole environment is endemic with these plastics. And for people who can't detoxify, this is a big issue. Chemicals and heavy metals, so lead and mercury, they're key things, and particularly for those of you who have done any reading on MTHFR, you may have heard of Amy Yasko. And she was really instrumental in bringing the whole MTHFR into the headlines, but specifically she worked with children with autism. And so she did testing, MTHFR testing on all her children who had autism, and she found that nearly 80%, 80 plus, had the MTHFR gene. But she also noted that most of them had lead and mercury toxicity. Why? Because they don't have sufficient glutathione to be able to get rid of these toxic metals. Stress, as we said, huge part to play in this. Medications. So how many people are on antacids or proton pump inhibitors? Too many. And normally when you're only supposed to take it for a couple of months, people I see sometimes absolutely on it years. So what does it do? It decreases your B12. And what does B12 do? Help you use your methyls. And that's why vegans and vegetarians are at such risk, because they are depleting their methyls. They've got all the methyls in the world, but because they've got no B12, they can't use it. And that's a big, big deal. And it's not that I'm against vegans and vegetarians, it's that I can see so many of them with serious health conditions because they are not supporting their B12. And so they either have to take B12 medication or they have to get injections. There's no if, buts, or maybes about it. They cannot get B12 from their food. Methotrexate. So methotrexate we use in cancer, and it is literally to stop the folate cycle. That is what it is meant to do, because you obviously don't want replication of cells when you've got cancer. So that aging, as I said, when we age, things don't work as well, particularly our hydrochloric acid is down-regulated, along with a lot of other enzymes. I see so much zinc deficiency. That's also going to affect these key pathways. And of course, zinc and hydrochloric acid in the gut work hand in hand, because you need zinc to have sufficient hydrochloric acid and vice versa. Diet. So, really what you eat is what you end up with. And so the more crappy the diet, the more you're having things that are mass produced, the more strain and stress you are putting on these pathways, which are already having issues with coping. So we have to make sure that our diet, and as I said today in the Facebook group, a diet that fits you may not be the diet that is right for the person next to you. So we've got to look at diet. I guess we've absolutely got to be as clean as we can, but everybody's diet is going to be slightly different because of what they're presenting with. And some people have higher oxalates, some people have high histamine, some people have gut bugs that might be fed by particular elements in the diet like carbohydrates. So we all need to listen to our bodies and understand what's going on to create the diet that suits you. So, for example, people with autoimmune disease really shouldn't be having grains at all, because it then takes the pressure off the immune system, and in a lot of cases it can completely reverse Hashimoto's thyroiditis, for example. And obviously alcohol is a big deal, particularly if we're having it in excess, because that more than anything will completely deplete all our Bs. So we've got to be very careful. And a little bit, obviously moderation is the key, but certainly if you're drinking more than a couple of drinks a night, then there is a problem. And I would say if you're drinking every night, that's a problem. We need to have at least a couple of alcohol-free days in a row every week. Now, in the research, certain conditions are associated with a lack of methyls, and these are just a few of them. So you can see it's wide-ranging. And why? Because let's say anything that affects our brain, so ADD, ADHD, addictive behavior, Alzheimer's, anxiety, bipolar, what else is there? Headaches, insomnia, low neurotransmitters, obsessive compulsive disease. All of these things we have to have methyls to make sure that our brains are working optimally. Now, obviously, it can then be a balance with serotonin and GABA and dopamine and everything else. But methyls, a lack of methyls, and I certainly see in clinic, I would say 70 to 80% of all patients present with anxiety and or depression. And sometimes I've had patients that have been on, 3 or 4 antidepressants, and we've managed with their doctors to get them off absolutely all medication because we've balanced the underlying biochemistry, and their mood then improves out of sight, and they can go forward and they can be really stable in their mood, and they actually don't need antidepressants. So I see that time and time again. But certainly chronic fatigue is probably one of the other biggest things I see, and multiple chemical sensitivity, because the detoxification capacity just isn't great. So if we're looking, this is our folate cycle. So up here is our cell membrane. And when you eat your leafy greens, it comes through the cell membrane and it will come into this dihydrofolate, or this dihydrofolate reductase gene will convert it, and it needs to be converted all the way down here. Here's our 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate. That is our active folate. And here is our MTHFR gene. So what we want to try and do is pass it all the way down here. So you can see if you have an MTHFR gene, say homozygous, well, your last step in that conversion is having a problem. Now, B2 or riboflavin is the cofactor for this MTHFR gene, but we're still going to have problems if we don't get enough methyls through the system, because this is where we're aiming to get. Now you can see folic acid is at the top, and it puts pressure on this dihydrofolate reductase enzyme. So for example, by law, all commercial bread flour and bread products have to be fortified with folic acid. Now if you see folate on a food label, it is folic. Don't ask me why, but it is. It's folic. It is impossible to get active folates into food because it's not stable enough. You can only get it from your leafy greens and, say, your beans. So folic here is definitely not the right thing, because if you've got a problem right down here, you want to be giving an active. You don't want to be taking folic acid. Also, if you are having some bread every day, you might be having some biscuits or some breakfast cereal fortified with folic acid, which most of them are. You might be having some protein drinks or protein powders or whatever. Well, the theory is, and if you then throw a multivitamin on top with folic acid in it of 400 micrograms, you are completely overwhelming this enzyme, which only has a capacity for 200 micrograms a day. So what happens? You slow this even more, potentially inhibit it, and you're building up unmetabolized folic acid. Now, there's not a lot of research about this, but there's certainly some research that says that this buildup in folic acid creates an unmetabolized folic acid that then has potentially detrimental effects on our health, like decreasing natural killer cells. There's also been many studies that have said that excess in folate may cause some cancers. Well, 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate, your active folate, can't get to too high a level because it's metabolized by the body. Folic can. So we've potentially, and there was a study released last year that said an increase in folate in pregnant women may actually be a cause for autism. Holy heck, that's significant. So all this folic acid that we're happily taking all the time, which we have taken all the time because we wanted to stop neural tube defects, it may not be the right thing for a lot of people. And I would actually go so far as to say, it's my own personal opinion, I don't think folic acid is actually good for anybody, because if you can use 5-formyl tetrahydrofolate, which is folinic, or 5-methyl, you're certainly better off than you are using folic acid up here. Okay, so what you just saw, your folate cycle, is actually this cycle here. So you can see your MTHFR gene here, and your 5-methyl is produced. Now the idea is this: the 5-methyl is produced with the help of B12, which sits in here. You then pass this folate into what we call the methionine cycle, which is this cycle. And remember, we were talking about SAMe. Well, here's SAMe. So what I want you to think of it like this: your folate pathway is your production company, your B12 is your courier, and your SAMe is your pharmacist. So the pharmacist is sitting there and he's saying, okay, guys, I've got a lot of people that need this methyl. Give me the product and I'll distribute it. That's his job. And you can see it's there for the DNA, RNA, protein, lipids, etc. So what happens if your production company is sitting here and it's really not producing what it should? Well, a couple of things can happen. If you've got low folate, you're actually going to pick up very little of your homocysteine here because you can't utilize it and bring it into this cycle. And Sammy, the pharmacist, is going to be sitting there saying, hey guys, where's the product? I'm using it, but I haven't got any more to distribute. If your B12 is low, that's even more disastrous because even if you are creating folate, you can't move it into this cycle. So what we try and evaluate is what part of the pathway is actually falling down for you. Now, without B12, without folate, and without B6, homocysteine can raise to quite significant numbers. And in some people, that in itself can give you a risk for cardiovascular issues. In pregnancy, the combination of MTHFR and elevated homocysteine can also be very detrimental. It can be, we can get preeclampsia, we can get miscarriage, we can get a whole lot of other things that go on because of elevated homocysteine. But we certainly want it to be good level and not too low either. So it's all about balancing these pathways and making sure that the pharmacist has the product that he needs. And down here you can see glutathione. So this is why glutathione, why it's so important for people with MTHFR gene to support these pathways. Because if you don't have enough coming down this, what we call the CBS pathway, you're going to be low in glutathione, which is your major antioxidant. Right, now, so let's look at what does a mutation mean. So when you have DNA sequences, those sequences are made up of one of these four letters, G, A, T, and C, and they're all in 3 pairs. So you might have GAT, ATC, TCG in any and different combinations. So what a mutation means is you have a change from what is normal. So that change can mean one of a few things. So one, the protein doesn't actually function at all. It might function partially. It might actually end up with something that does something completely different. You might not end up with a protein at all, or you might not see any change whatsoever. So that's what a mutation is. It's just a change from the normal sequence. So in the case of 677T, what it means is the cytosine has been changed to a thymine at 0.677 on chromosome 1. That's what it means. Now you can see a lot of these. Sometimes you get a report which has some of these numbers as well. So you might actually see in your results MTHFR A222V. So without getting too complicated, what it means is that the base change has caused an amino acid change, and that's written as the amino acid change. Now, if you ever want to do research, this is the universal, what we call RSID for the MTHFR C677T, because it does get very, very complicated. And so when you're searching for a gene in the research, in the literature, this is the ideal way to go. Now, if you're looking at the A1298C, you can see the RSID is just different by this one numeral here. Instead of a 3, it's a 1. Same thing, adenine being changed to a cytosine at position 1298 on chromosome 1, and that's caused an amino acid change. But it all means A1298C. So when you get your results, you will either have A1, you might have 677T heterozygous, and you think, wow, what does that mean? Well, heterozygous means that you got one copy of the gene from mum or dad. So your mum and your dad, they have 2 copies of every gene, like you do. And randomly, when you are formed and when your DNA is developing, you randomly get one of each. You never know which, but you'll get one from mum and one from dad. So if you're heterozygous, you just got 1 copy. We don't know whether you got it from mum or dad. You just did. Homozygous, though, means you got that one mutated copy from mum and dad. So you can guarantee that they both had at least 1. Now, the MTHFR mutation means it is a down regulation of the enzyme. So the enzyme that is meant to create 5-methyl tetrahydrofolate just doesn't do its job as best it should. So if you have 1 copy of the C677T, it's roughly a 30 to 40% down regulation. So you're getting roughly about 60% through. If you're homozygous, it's much worse because you're only really getting about 40% through, 30 to 40%. If you're homozygous for the A1298C, roughly 40%, so you're getting 60% through. The heterozygous, I really don't think this is much of an issue at all. Obviously it is a down regulation, but I don't think it's significant enough that we've got to say, well, this may be a potential problem. And what I often find is it's other genes around this one that are causing the issues, not necessarily this particular one. Now, if you have 1 copy of each, so let's say you have 1 of the 677T and 1 of the A1298C, we call that compound heterozygous, and it's 40 to 50% loss of function. Okay, so let's get into the testing now. So let's see, can you just type into your question box how many of you actually do know that you've got the MTHFR gene, and how many of you know that you've got that and then you're thinking, well, what else can I test? So I'd like to know where to focus this part of the presentation. So if none of you have testing, I'll go through the initial testing, but if you do and you want to know more about 23andMe and more about if you want to know more about other potential genetic mutations, we'll talk about that as well. So Melissa said she found out on Friday. Okay, so is it homozygous, Melissa, or heterozygous? Have you got 1 copy or 2? Homozygous. Okay, all right, good. So you've got a 60% down regulation of that gene. So potentially that is a big deal for you, potentially. Now, I'm guessing that you're online because you do have issues of some sort with your health. And so because the homozygous 677T is the greatest down regulation, it's the one where I think we can, really help I think we can help with all, I know we can help with all of them, but what I'm trying to say is I think that's the one that we definitely need to address always, because I think we've got to do analyses to work out, how much support does someone with a homozygous 677T need, particularly with their SAMI, their pharmacist sitting there going, hey, I haven't got product, guys. So John is saying that he's homozygous A1298C. Okay, so the homozygous A1298C is definitely one I think that really is more about neurological function. And I see a lot of homozygous A1298C that have issues with anxiety and particularly depression. So whenever and we are actually finding out now that homozygous A1298C can have just as many issues with fertility as the homozygous C677T. All right, so there's a few of you that do want to hear about the testing options. So let's actually go through it. So I'll go back. So you have, let's say you don't know just yet, and you want to know, how do I find out if I have the MTHFR gene? So there's a few things you can do. Number 1, you can go onto our website, and in the shop, you can click on MTHFR kits. And when you click on those kits, you will actually be able to select a home finger prick test or a buccal swab. A buccal swab means you get a swab that you run the inside of the mouth. It's great for kids, great for babies, and you don't need to prick your finger. Mind you, the prick the finger is simple and easy and not a big deal unless you're terrified of needles. Now, the second option is you can go to your doctor. Now, initially, that was actually a really easy, simple thing to do, and a lot of doctors would actually turn around and say, okay, no problem. But then what we started to see with the work that we've been doing over the last 5 years to get awareness of this out, more and more people were going to their doctors saying, I want to check for this gene. Many, I won't say all, but many of them turned around and said, well, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't even know what it is. Then many turned around and said, well, got the result, but I have no idea what you're meant to do about it. And so they then complained to the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners and to the AMA, and they said, look, this is ridiculous. Everyone's coming in asking about this MTHFR gene. We don't know how to treat it. We don't know what to do about it. Can you just stop people asking for it? Now, I don't know if that was the exact words, but that's certainly the feedback that we got from our patients who were seeing doctors. So the RACGP then put out a blanket email out to all their doctors saying, don't bother testing. And that happened in about July last year. So it is increasingly difficult for you to get a blood test through your doctor. However, if you are really keen to get a blood test, just ring our clinic on 02 9908 1888. That's Sydney. And we'll send you a referral for either Lavity or Douglas Hanley Moore, if that's what you want to do. There's many ways to do it, but that is certainly the first step. So many of you will then go, okay, well, I've got this gene. So you can see there, you can just put it into your cart and the kit will be sent to you. You send it home. It'll be sent home. You do the test at home. You send it back to the lab and the lab will send you the results and also sends us the results and we will forward it on to you. If you then say, well, I really want to have an appointment with you, I want to be able to understand this more, then we'll do it. If you say, well, I have a practitioner already and I'd like to take these results to my practitioner, great. But whatever way you want to address it is fine by us. Now, let's say you found out you had the gene, you've seen a practitioner, and all of a sudden the practitioner says, look, I don't feel like I have enough information to help you. I would like you to consider further genetic testing. So the one that we use the most is called 23andMe. And if you go into the resources section of our website, the very first button is 23andMe. You can click on the link and you can find out, it'll send you straight to the website. Now on the website, it has instructions on how to do the kit. So this is the kit and you will get sent a kit home where you will collect saliva. Now that saliva then goes back to the US and you then get your genome. So 30,000 genes in your genome will be done and you can log on. Now you can see inherited conditions. You can see drug response to certain medications. They're actually doing this more and more now, which is really quite exciting. So if you're on an antidepressant or a proton pump inhibitor, you can actually go on and say, well, am I genetically able to cope with this particular drug? It's the same as cholesterol medication. So you can actually go in and say, well, let me see which is the right medication for me. You can also look at genetic risk and you can look at your traits. Now, what I would definitely say is, so you can see here, you can actually go in and there's a lot of information on the site. You can see what your susceptibility is. Are you better off with certain medications versus others? Antiplatelet medications. Are you more susceptible to breast cancer or celiac disease or cystic fibrosis or lactose intolerance? Now, what I normally say to patients is, I don't want you to look at this because it will do your head in. because this is what you're going to get. You are going to get a whole list of numbers and figures, and it's going to be complete gobbledygook. And you're going to go, well, what on earth am I going to do with that? It's really interesting to see where your ancestry is from, and you can actually log in and it tells you, are you primarily European or Asian, and where's your heritage from? And that part of it is really quite interesting. But this is not, because you don't want to know, most people do not want to know that they have a susceptibility to breast cancer. What is far more valuable is being able to input this data into a program. So what we read is what we call a variant report, which is an app that automatically puts all that raw data into the computer, and it will spit out something that we can see. Now, there are a few of them. Sterling's app, MTHFRsupport.com. And again, on our resources page of our website, the second link is that link, and you can go into that. The NutriHacker, LiveWello, Genetic Genie, Promethease, Ben Lynch has also launched one. But the one we like to use is actually the Sterling's app, because for us, it gives us such a great, interesting cross-section of your phase 1 and phase 2 liver detoxification. So it doesn't tell us anything about your diseases. It tells us, how does your phase 1 and phase 2 liver genes work? What's your folate cycle like? What's your methionine cycle like? So all those cycles I showed you. What's your CBS? What's your dopamine cycle like? What's serotonin like? Do you have any issues with your immune function? So there's a lot of great things that you can have a look at. Whoops. And so this is the report. This is the first page of the report. There's actually 87 pages. So what you get, so this is liver detox phase 1. And so what you're going to get is a report 84 pages like this. And basically, we read it then and say, okay, in the case of this, we can see that CYP1A2, you're homozygous for this particular allele, and therefore we need to consider, are you sensitive to coffee? Because this is very much how you break down your caffeine. CYP1B1, it goes with a lot of genes that, this is a non-person, by the way, so I'm not being, I'm not doing the wrong thing. This is on Sterling's site, and it's just a random made-up person. So I just thought I'd clarify that. So CYP1B1 is a really important gene that helps you metabolize toxic estrogens, and it works with the COMT gene. These ones, CYP2B6 and 2D6 and all these, they have different functions. Now, I've done a half-hour webinar for you, and if you would like to go in and look at it in more detail as to what that 23andMe gives you, the Sterling's app, go onto our website under resources, and you'll see Facebook Live Q&A videos. And it's this Sterling's app, what does it tell us? So this is a bit more about the 23andMe and the questions. So if you haven't seen some of these Facebook videos, this will give you more questions, more answers. And here are the questions that people on those Facebook groups asked us, and they might be some of the questions. So you can listen to any of these, but this is the half-hour one that gives you a much better breakdown as to what you're going to see with the Sterling's app. All right, so you've now found out that you've got the MTHFR gene. What do you do? And many of you will go, well, look, I just want to do this myself. I don't want to see a practitioner. Now, if you're really ill, that's not a great idea, because you can actually get side effects. And a good practitioner will help you in understanding what is the best way forward. So what we also have on this site is, I haven't got it in here, but we actually do have a section on this resources page that says how to start with supplementation. So if you are going to go it alone, you can look at that section and start with that. But you must make sure that if you've got gut issues or a really serious health condition, you don't do it on your own. But you have to be aware that folate can actually cause very serious side effects if there's other things going on. So, for example, you can get increased agitation and anxiety. Some people can even be suicidal. You can get increased fatigue and muscle aches and headaches and rashes and all sorts of things. Why? Because the other pathways are not doing their job. So remember, I said that if you don't have enough B12, then if you can't use your methyls, they're going to build up, and that's when you'll get a side effect. If you've got a lot of gut stuff going on, or your ability to regenerate glutathione, your major antioxidant, when you stimulate these pathways, you're actually causing detoxification. And so the problem is if that side of the pathway is completely terrible and you've got no capacity to detoxify, you're in a world of hurt. So you've got to tackle the gut and the other issues first. You can certainly put your B12 in, and that's what we say in our how to start with supplementation. You put the cofactors in, you put the B12 in, but you must do the folate very slowly, and I've given you tips on how to do that. So you can see here we've got a lot of genes. All these colours are genes. And so not only do we need to support these other genes, and that's what all the other bees help do, but we've got to make sure that our production company is working well, our courier is doing its job, and that the pharmacist certainly has his product to give away. And this is this is Ben Lynch's pathway planner. Same thing. Here's our folate pathway. Here's our B12 being recycled. And you can see that this is zinc dependent. So crucially important, you've got good levels of zinc too. And here's our methionine. Here's our SAMe. And here's where we make our glutathione. But you can see here, this circle here, that's your energy cycle. So you can understand if all of this is under functioning, why people get chronic fatigue, because you are not getting what you need down into this citric acid cycle, which is your energy cycle. So it's huge. We also, remember we said that folic acid puts pressure on dihydrofolate reductase. Well, it's the key gene that recycles all our brain chemicals. So it recycles here. You can see tryptophan being converted to 5-hydroxytryptophan, which supports serotonin. Here you've got tyrosine being converted to L-DOPA, which supports dopamine. So without this enzyme working, you're not going to recycle these really, really important amino acids back through this enzyme. And this is folate dependent. So there's a lot that can and is improved by improving these pathways. All right, so the key action steps, and for those of you, who was it that Melissa just found out on Friday? So key things: avoid the folic acid, definitely. Make sure you're reading labels. If it's scent, if it says on it that it's folate, it's folic, so avoid it. Increase your natural folate containing foods. It doesn't mean that you go out and you juice 45 kilos of spinach a week, because then you can get too much in the system. So what you can fit on the plate is what you should be eating. So your leafy green veggies and your legumes are really important. Avoid the allergenic foods. So for those of you that have got autoimmune or allergies, you've got to be careful. And gluten, predominantly the reason we say gluten is because we know that it can have an impact on gut function if you're susceptible. We also know that most gluten-containing foods have folic acid in it. Dairy, I think that's a hard one. I'm not a proponent of drinking milk, but I think if you want to have some organic, goat's cheese or sheep's feta or something like that, then go ahead. And soy, probably one of the highest sprayed crops in the world. And, although, some of them even say organic, I think we've got to question the processing of soy. And it's probably one of the highest glyphosate or Roundup sprayed products out there. Avoid inflammatory foods. So as I said before, the more junk you put in, the harder it is for you to get rid of it. And particularly those who are homozygous 677T, your antioxidant capacity is going to be under strain. So the less your body has to process, the better off you'll be. And that certainly is also due to, the toxins and chemicals. So the plastics, as we said before, the BPA, any of the synthetic substances. And so we've got a lot of now really good, reasonably priced organic products in the supermarket, earth products where they don't have the phthalates, they don't have the endocrine disrupting chemicals in there, and that's what we should be using. But ladies, also be very careful about what you put on your skin, because your makeup, your cleansers, your moisturizers, your soaps can also be a source of toxins that your body just can't get rid of. And even if you go into Priceline or any of the discount pharmacies, they've got great, even the Sukin is really reasonably priced. It's phthalate free, and you can use that as a wash or moisturizer or whatever. Obviously, we want to encourage our antioxidant capacity, and any increase in colourful vegetables and fruits is going to be supportive of that. Stress management. So remember, we said the biggest burden for you on your methylation cycle is stress. It chews through methyls more than anything else. So if you are, and it is a catch-22, because often when I see patients, particularly those that are homozygous for either, when you actually fix the cycle and you improve methylation, all of a sudden their ability to cope with stress is so much better. And they turn around and they'll say, look, you know what? I used to react to everything and I used to feel stressed all the time, but I don't really anymore. I seem to be coping with stress a lot better. So I think it is a bit of a catch-22. I think if your methyls are low, you're going to react to stress more, you're going to feel it more. But if you can improve that, a lot of the pain and anguish with this stress and anxiety will come off. And obviously, we don't want to be smoking and putting extra toxins in or having too much alcohol. I think that's really important. So that's certainly the basics to look at now when you're just starting out and you're thinking. And you know what? Just because you have a mutation, it actually doesn't mean you have any issue at all. That's really important to remember. But I would say you're probably online because you do, and you're looking for something, an answer for why you might be feeling the way you're feeling. So, and often people ask me about children and they say, well, they've got this mutation. I say, well, if they're reaching milestones, they're happy, they're doing well at school, and they're not particularly stressed, then you're doing the right thing. Obviously they're getting enough folate from the diet. If they're doing exercise, that's great. If they're improving at school and they're not having difficulties and they don't have ADD or ADHD, then don't do anything other than what you're doing. So I think that's important too. So I think, what next? So as I said before, if you have a chronic health condition and you really do need support, see a qualified practitioner. And I'm actually in the process of training some fantastic practitioners that I can put up on our site, hopefully by August, which will give you other options to see other people outside our clinic, because this is very complicated. And I think far too many practitioners out there are saying, yes, we deal with methylation and MTHFR, but actually all they do is give methylfolate, and it's not necessarily the right thing to do. If you can't do that, see the resources section of the website on how to start with supplementation, and do it slowly. Listen to our Facebook groups. I'm online live every Wednesday at 3 o'clock. You can ask questions. We talk about different subjects every week. And if you're having particular issues, I'm happy to jump on and answer some questions. Don't necessarily start with folate, particularly if you have a sulfur sensitivity. So if you can't eat onion, garlic, eggs, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbage without having pain in the stomach or anything like that, then you've got a sulfur sensitivity and you need to address that first. If you've got chronic diarrhea or chronic constipation, you need to address that. It could be sulfur, it could be histamine, it could be a bug. If you have heavy metal toxicity, you've got to be really careful because you're going to be stimulating these pathways of detoxification, and your body may not be at a level that it can deal with that. So I think that's really important. Oxalates. So those of you that have pyroluria, I don't know if you know about pyroluria, but pyroluria is being termed pyroluria. I think all pyroluria is a problem with the CBS pathway, but it's essentially a lack of B6 and zinc. Now, you've got to ask yourself, why is there a lack of B6 and zinc? And often there can be a concurrent iron issue as well. So I think what happens is oxalates, some people have a problem processing oxalates. It's genetic. They have genes that affect their oxalate pathway. Some people are overloaded and have had exposure to Roundup, which actually uses that same pathway that oxalates do, and it affects it. So if you've got a family history of thyroid disease or urinary tract infections or recurrent candida or kidney stones or autism, you've got to be thinking oxalate, particularly if you've got a B6, zinc and iron issue. And gut issues, gut is so important, because the gut, as we talked about today on the Facebook page, and that webinar, that session has been loaded up to the website this afternoon under that Facebook group sessions. So we talked a lot about this today. You know, if you have got issues with your gut where dysbiotic bacteria can be creating an increase in histamine, can be creating an increase in ammonia, you might not have enough prebiotics to feed the good bacteria that you do have. There's so many issues that can be going on with the gut that can upset this pathway. So we need to be addressing that before you're sticking buckets of folate in. So I think we've come to the end of it. So please jump in and ask me some questions if you have any. And everybody's probably a bit shy. Oh, okay. So Melissa's saying she's seeing Joe at our clinic. Fantastic. And now you've made the right choice to contact us. Fantastic. And I think you have too, because there's no one else in Australia that does as much as we do in terms of analysing these patients that have really chronic issues. John has asked about, I'm just reading it. Okay, so he's asking about testing. All right, so John's question is, if we do the blood test, do we always have to do the 23andMe? No, John, you don't. So as I said before, you can work with your practitioner. You can start off and improve certain elements of, and you've got to be careful with the 23andMe in that. The only thing you've really got to be careful about is this. From a legal point of view, if you want to get life insurance and the life insurance company says to you, do you have genetic testing? You have to hand it over. And if they then look into it and go, oh, well, you've got the gene that affects your cardiovascular function, we're not going to cover you for a heart attack. Now, that's quite feasible, and they do that. But what you've got to ask yourself the question is my health at this point more crucial than the fact that I may or may not need life insurance down the track, because it's only life insurance that is affected. So if you don't want life insurance, it's not an issue. But obviously you've got to consider that. So that's the only precursor I would say about 23andMe testing. But really, you only need to do it if you're not progressing with your practitioner, or you have a really big issue with your health. That's what I would say. If you have a chronic health condition, then being able to see that report actually gives us a fantastic insight into what's your susceptibility. So think of it like this. If you're driving along a freeway and your lane is full of potholes, it really doesn't matter what you do to the car, does it? You can change the tires, you can change the suspension, you can fix it all you like. But if you're still driving over potholes, you're going to have a problem. And it really is not going to help the car. But if someone comes along and plugs up those potholes, the car, regardless of how old it is, it'll probably drive along pretty well. And that's how I liken what we're doing. We're plugging up your susceptibility, and we're ensuring that you can have a smooth drive. And I think once you do it, the body does know what to do. Do you know any practitioners in Perth? Yes, I do. So Dane Pervan, Danepervan, he's a doctor in Perth. He and I work very closely together. And he is going to be doing our training very soon. But he has a long wait list, unfortunately, because he's an excellent integrative doctor. But if you contact the clinic, Leanne, I will just email them info@mthfrsupport.com.au. I'll send you a couple of names of practitioners in Perth, and then you can try them and see who you can get into, because unfortunately when you find good doctors, they're actually usually very booked up. But certainly I'm happy to give you those names. But don't forget, we do Skype appointments. All our practitioners do Skype appointments, and we have lots of patients in Perth for some reason. And I don't know whether it's the water over there or what you're exposed to. I'm not quite sure, but we certainly have so many patients in Perth. And it could also be the fact that, maybe you have more exposure to environmental toxins there with the mining and with glyphosate. I've got one patient, and she says that every 2 weeks they put a sign outside the park across the road from her saying Roundup is being used today, stay out. That's crazy. But so yes, I don't know, but certainly I will send you that information, Leanne, if you get in contact with the clinic. Okay, any other questions? There's a few here. All right, so someone is saying, Sally is saying that she's compound heterozygous and she has chronic fatigue, anxiety, depression, PCOS. Wow, okay, so there's a lot going on. So I definitely think the homozygous A1298C and the homozygous MTHFR 677T, we do need to address anxiety and depression. And there's often different mechanisms going on. What we do, particularly with depression, anxiety, we focus particularly on serotonin, dopamine pathways, GABA, which is your nice calming brain chemical, makes you feel good. We look at all these. We look at your susceptibility. So there are certain genes that might make you more susceptible to schizophrenia. And I've actually looked into this, and we can see that there's relatives that have had schizophrenia. And it's really simple to see what sort of pathways are being broken down. I also think we can now see the cannabinoid pathway, which is, part of that whole dopamine pathway. And these people with cannabinoid pathway issues can really be helped by certain medications. And they're often people who have, they might have horrendous gut issues, they might have depression, they might have anxiety. So we can really look at it. And from a PCOS perspective, I would definitely say that you need to check your estrogen metabolism, because we know that when you have a susceptibility to any estrogen dominant condition, fibrocystic breasts, fibrocystic ovaries, endometriosis, fibroids, any of that, you need to be checking how does your liver get rid of toxic estrogens. And there are certain genes that show us your susceptibility to not being able to do that efficiently. And so if we can plug up that pothole, give you a nutrient that makes up for the inefficiency of the gene, then your body will do what it needs to do. So I actually think this is really exciting, because I think, there's so many people with so many chronic health conditions out there, but unfortunately our medical model doesn't really know how to deal with it other than giving drugs, pharmaceutical drugs. And we all know that, if you're on it for a certain amount of time, you've got to take another drug to counteract the side effects of the first drug. So the chronic health model is really not being addressed. And I think we can do that really well. I think if we can peel back these onion layers and look at where the susceptibility lies and make up for the inefficiency of the gene, I've seen some amazing reactions, some amazing results from patients. Sometimes it takes a long time. If you've had a condition for 30 or 40 years, you're not going to turn it around in 5 minutes. The body needs time to heal. And yes, that can be frustrating. But, most people will see really significant results in months. So I think it's exciting. We can actually change your predisposition. And that's great. That's got to be a good thing. So, all right. Well, I think it looks like you've all answered the majority of, you've all asked the majority of your questions. So good night. Thank you so much for joining tonight. And I look forward to seeing you on the next webinar. Our next one for next month, so let me just tell you what it is going to be, well, it's actually going to be talking about supplementing. So we're going to be going through how you start supplementing and what you actually need to do if you're not seeing a practitioner, because I know it's probably not... people will say, well, what are you doing that for? People have to go to practitioners, but the problem is people don't. And so if people out there are trying supplements themselves and getting side effects, I would rather tell you how to do it cautiously and tell you how to do it properly than have you go willy-nilly and do it yourself. So I am going to talk through, it's obviously not going to be a be-all and end-all for everybody, but it certainly will give you a bit of a way on how to start. So thanks again. Look forward to seeing you next month, and take care. Bye for now.